when I was coming from that side of the fence, I had a lot of dollars to be able to spend. I had the ability to influence change by saying, I won't do business with you unless you do this. I need SSO. I need the ability to egress this data. I need this. I need that. Whatever it may be, you need to be better about your tech debt. Those kind of things that we come up with. That felt like I could move the needle. That was my goal. I want to move the needle. I want to make things better for us collectively.
So anyways, welcome to MSP Confidential, everybody. This is sort of a little pet project that I've been kind of poking at for a little while and finally got the impetus, the bias for action to go and do it and get some stuff set up and get it going. And you and I have done, first guest invites to our shows in the past.
What was the first one of yours? What was the title of that? You remember?
It was Cafe con Luis when I was doing that
Cafe
with
con Luis. It was fancy. I felt fancy when I went on that show. The title just set it aside.
Well, and it was a great discussion too, because we were talking about auto discover and automated deployments and stuff like that. And it was clearly a topic that a lot of people had on their minds back then. This was like 2020, I want to say.
Sure.
So especially with COVID sort of in full swing and everybody trying to figure out stuff remotely, there seemed to be an appetite for it. And I was kind of teasing that we should do a part two of that session at some point. So maybe I'll have you back. We'll talk about auto discover and all that stuff, because I think a lot has improved in the capabilities. A lot more vendors and OEMs are participating in the programs.
And you're also even turning that around where you're making decisions to control what can connect to data, thereby defining what is an asset based on that, right? Conditional access methodologies, things that restrict access through zero trust or SDP or other things that come up that allow you to now say, well, auto discovery is discovery of what's connecting and how it's connecting before it ever connects. Like if that comes into context. So anyways, off on a tangent, but I think we should do a part two at some point for sure.
No, it's a great tangent. And I think it's precisely the reason to mention it is because I think that is still something that a lot of people have not started doing yet. And sometimes, MSPs work with small clients. And so sometimes it feels like a lot of work to set up to do, 5 machine deployments or 10 machine deployments, or just the piecemeal deployment here and there. But I think when, push comes to shove and you have no choice, it's nice to have all those things set up. And I think, onboarding a new client, you should go through the process of setting up the autopilot, getting all the OEMs connected, all those things. Now this on LinkedIn, it never did go live. I'm just going to drop this. The live stream seems to have
they can join us right here in this here platform
on the LinkedIn side, but join us here. Let me just drop a note just in case folks are jumping into the LinkedIn.
Cool. They can join us.
So I know you have now, you're almost 2 years into your vendor journey, right?
Sure.
Is it about that?
Yep.
So I was curious to ask you a bit of, your hindsight on making that switch, because you spent some time in the corporate setting, you spent some time at an MSP that went through a pretty interesting merger and sale. And now on the vendor side. And so tell me what has changed in your life or in your way of going to market, so to speak.
Yeah. So remember, what drives me? It's mission focused, right? When I was at Iconic and when Iconic became Integris and I decided to part ways in that space, or we did, I suppose, when that occurred and I found myself looking for what I could do next, I had money in my pocket, right? I wasn't concerned about that. I wanted to find the place that I could do the most good. I wanted to find the place that I could absolutely affect change. And if you think about it, what was so cool about being at Iconic when I was trying to ask vendors to be better, and I actually ironically kind of didn't realize that there's some hypocrisy out there about this too. And maybe I'll touch on that in a minute. But when I was coming from that side of the fence, I had a lot of dollars to be able to spend. I had the ability to influence change by saying, I won't do business with you unless you do this. I need SSO. I need the ability to egress this data. I need this. I need that. Whatever it may be, you need to be better about your tech debt. Those kind of things that we come up with. That felt like I could move the needle. That was my goal. I want to move the needle. I want to make things better for us collectively. And so the next piece was when I came to a vendor, I don't think I understood how much there was just a direct one-to-one parallel there. But now I'm in a position at Pax8 specifically, I think, to do this with lots and lots of vendors to influence change within and to drive data projects and things that, are really meaningful and useful to MSPs, but at the same time still do what I even asked to be let out of my NDAs and my non-competes for, or not NDAs, but my non-competes for, was to be able to actually educate and empower MSPs directly and to be able to actually teach and tell what I've learned. And hey, don't stumble on that rock. I've learned that rock, unfortunately. And so I think
Mm,
what I've really leaned into and gotten better at and have realized is that there's just way more stage and way more impact that I can have in
yeah.
working in that specific space as a vendor. And I don't even think of myself as a vendor. I don't even think that's a fair way to say it. I clearly work at a vendor. I clearly love Pax8 and what we do as a mission. But I really think of myself as an MSP that understands other MSPs' struggles and journey and the problem, the giant issue. And one of the things that comes up directly is I do an exercise in the audience the other day. I said, how many of you think your vendors should be better about how they handle safeguards? How many of them should invest more in their cybersecurity? How many of them should be better at how they do their application design and deal with their tech debt? How many
Yeah.
of you have
How
that
many of you are
solved?
doing it?
How many of
Yeah.
you have solved that in your own organization? There's none of them
Ooh.
with hands up. And I think the point is that you have this understanding that there's this giant hypocrisy that your clients see the same thing for you. Why aren't you better? Why aren't you handling my security as you as an MSP? And so it's this shared humility. I did a talk with Jason Slagle in Grand Rapids at GERCON a couple of weeks ago, and we took the title of it was "MSPs Suck, but the world without them is worse." And we did an argument that even people with internal IT persons that are doing it are way worse than the worst MSP. We proved factually on a lot of the clients he took over that they were actually in worse shape. They'd done dumber things. They didn't have any
Yeah.
guidance. They had one homogeneic network that never changed since Charlie had been there or Chuck for the last 37 years. And so you get into this understanding that we all have a shared problem, Luis. We all have to be better. And I feel like back to your root of your question, I feel like I have the right platform, the right support, the right movements, the right things, the right connections and friends, the
Mm.
right, community to be involved in that's all trying to solve this. And I don't know if that's as much of my change as being at a vendor or as much as my change I've seen around me in the community and how much people are actually freaking doing and getting there and smart and understand stuff. The conversations we're having are so much deeper and better today, Luis, in my opinion, than anything we've seen. And I don't know, man. I'm shiny, happy people right now in that
I mean,
regard.
from
So
my purview, it certainly seems like Pax8 has given you, an amplification to the platform,
for
a way of
sure,
just talking to bigger groups.
yeah,
I imagine some of your security conversations have started filtering into the mission briefings that Pax8 does on a regular
everywhere.
basis. Like this is great because
Yeah,
these are reaching a lot of MSPs,
100%.
many of them in the very
30,000,
early
right?
stages, yeah,
Yeah,
and
so
and in the early stages of their business, right?
right.
Because I think that's the key aspect. Many of the larger, more mature MSPs have, for the most part, at least the teams and or
Ah,
the amount of people to be able to tackle some of these issues
I'd take the
with a little
first
bit
statement
more.
without the second being true. They have the teams. They may not have been given the resources or number of humans in a lot
No,
of
no,
my
but
experience, but they at least have
well,
somebody owning it. To your point,
fair enough. But I think there's a more compelling approach from the larger MSPs to try and tackle this. I won't disqualify any MSP by size because I think everybody cares about it equally. It's just the smaller shops are obviously in that chase, in that rat race, in the reactive sort of turmoil
yeah,
a lot of the time, and difficult to make space for some of the things that are longer tail
true
projects,
story.
development of
Strategic
management and
delineations,
strategic. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
But when they do, they're faster and more flexible to do so in a lot of ways. There's an interesting aspect of that. I actually, the simple, shameless plug for the book that Juan and Marnie and Wes and I
Yeah,
wrote.
yeah.
But, that's kind of one of the premises of this is that if you were to start an MSP today, if you're that one guy or gal solopreneur getting started, and you happen to make the choice presciently to only take clients that were identity centric and tied to only SaaS applications that I could now secure through SSO, that I could bring into one central place and do it the same way for every client, I actually wouldn't have as much on the tech side. I'd do most of it with robotic process automation. I would automate most of that. I might have 2 people work for me and scale that like crazy and go do the meaningful stuff. Like, how do I make Luis's business at ScalePad better by being involved with them than they would have been without me as an advisor on their tech? How do I go make them able to be better serving their customers? How do I secure their customers' data better for them? How do I help them understand that? Those are all strategic and tactical, but more top level tactical at the organization and decision
Yeah.
level, not down at the wrench turning level. That's commoditized more and more. So I think there's an interesting path that says we're actually getting it to make it easier for that solopreneur or 3-person shop to be able to scale crazy and have really high maturity level of efficaciousness of what they deliver and deploy, right? Like that aspect of it. So
So you've also been exposed, I think, a lot more to the European community, European MSPs, way more than you were maybe with Iconic or previously with your MSP, but now in the
yep.
Pax8 side of things. Um, do you find that maybe some of the European Union guidance and or
Uh-oh.
requirements are a little bit more stringent and actually helping MSPs become a little bit more sort of on the right side of history with some of the security initiatives? Because it feels like, despite the good intentions, at least in North America, it feels like until there is some kind of governmental regulation that enforces the stuff, it feels like people are just going to delay it until they're required to do it. But
So you broke
curious on
up
your
in the
thoughts.
beginning of it when you went to Europe from an exposure perspective. So you mind kind of giving me that bridge gap from what you just finished with?
Yeah, no, in Europe, we see the European Union deliver a lot more guidance and regulation around cybersecurity and things like this. And
Yeah.
so I think their MSPs over there are having deeper, more conversations about it and doing more things about it. They're kind of leading with it. And you see that a little bit in North America, but I find people will still, like, if something else becomes more important, the
Hmm.
cybersecurity becomes deprioritized because there's no
Yeah.
regulation that requires them to,
Yeah.
to do it.
Well,
But
and I think it's the actual impact of privacy based impact regulations in general. And what I mean by that is like privacy based are typically efficacy based, right? If it gets out, it got out. You failed your privacy duties. Sorry, right? And so whereas cybersecurity are a little more nuanced than that, right? In the sense that when you're dealing with cyber issue, it's really about reasonability. It's not about whether it happened or not. And I'll give you an example. CCPA basically says, "Hey, I can sue you if the data got out." Right? You can come in with some safe harbor conversation, maybe potentially talk about the things you did to mitigate, but at the end of the day, you did fail to protect the data. And I think you get into an interesting point where Europe has been under that pressure a lot more than the US has. Now, tangentially, where we do business with them, it forces us to have certain capabilities around privacy, delete data, things like that, have reasonable cybersecurity programs, all of those. I think they're more mature, but less mature in the same rights. I think you have, in general, a different approach of what is an MSP when you get into that European approach to that, and where are those lines drawn differently. And yeah, I do think, though, everyone's maturing. And I think you're right. The pressure is coming from, regulatory pressures, things coming from insurance has done more in the last 2 years since you and I spoke than anything else could have ever done. COVID
yeah,
being in the second category there, and I really would put those in that order. And that the insurance side of it would have happened notwithstanding of how dumb you are when you move your stuff home, right? Like
yeah.
at the end of the day, we'd still have the same challenges. It's not like everybody all of a sudden created all the new inroads there. They've been around for years. And so I think the argument is that COVID combined with this maturation of security impact, cost impact, whether it be insurance or you talk about subrogation, right? Risk where somebody's going to say, hey, listen, I'm suing you because you were the one actually at fault, Mr. MSP, or Excellion was sued, right, by an insurance company for their EMR software not being secure enough after a client got compromised, right? And so you start seeing things and pressures come. You have this in the last 2 years since October of 2021. You had the Civil Cyber Fraud Initiative by the Department of Justice that started using the False Claims Act to sue people, an or at least an MSP's client, over falsely claiming they had reasonable cybersecurity in place. So I think,
Yeah.
yes, I'm not known for short answers, right, brother? But yes, I think that the pressures over the last 2 years have changed the landscape so drastically that the maturation of the MSP always meets the need. Like, you want to talk about what we do? We meet the damn need. We help the little guy that makes up 42% of our gross domestic production in the United States able to actually make a small company be able to actually produce product and serve their clients and hopefully do it in a safe way. And it has been under attack, and it has asymptotically
Yeah.
grown from 2017 to 2022 in ways that we had never ever predicted, which meant that when you and I first talked, it was already right on that curve and it was already heading straight up this hockey stick type growth. And now here we are 2 years later, and everybody's got the battle scars to prove it, right? And and
So
and yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'll
so
get off
so
my
let
pedestal
me
here.
well let me talk about the receptiveness of the MSP clients for a second, because I think
Sure.
this is another area that maybe the dynamic of the conversation just hasn't shifted yet. And the reason I say this is because I had a conversation the other day with Chris Weiser.
Yeah.
We were talking about a lot of what his group focused with 7-figure MSPs, talking to MSPs about how to sell cybersecurity. And one of the interesting things that comes up a lot with MSPs is like, okay, well, we're having problems. What am I paying you for? Or we don't see you
Yeah.
ever. What am I paying you for? So it's like
It's
you're
commoditization of the
right.
MSPs, what you're talking about here. Yeah.
And so he said something that was really interesting, which is, well, if you think about like, and this is new to the landscape in the last 5 years, like this is why this shift maybe hasn't started or completed happening, but the conversation you have with clients typically is about the ROI of IT. You know,
Sure.
what investments are you making in technology that are paying dividends and creating more revenue for your
Yeah.
company? But there's another side of that, which is, well, imagine that 80% of businesses, because that's the stat, are going to get breached and they're going to have some kind of loss of revenue, loss of money, or some kind of,
Function,
money. Yeah.
capabilities, all of the things.
And so in reality, you're kind of starting from this like negative spot.
Yeah.
And if the ROI of your technology investment is actually $0 instead of $, then, hashtag winning, right?
Yeah.
But that conversation doesn't seem to be happening a lot. It's still kind of
It
revolving
doesn't.
around how does productivity and IT and servers and workstations generate revenue for your business? And
Yeah.
it's maybe the wrong conversation. Not sure. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
I think the conversation is filtering down. I think because of insurance, it's forcing some of it to be understood. But I think to your point, and we just talked about this for 2 days on stage at Momentum with Pax8, with David Powell and I, is that we've got to stop selling on risk. Or we've got to stop selling on tools and tech. We've got to start selling on risk. We've got to start selling on those things. But I started it and kicked it off with this. Alyssa Miller, famous CISO, last year at Deadwood, South Dakota, at Wild West Hack and Fest, which I head to next week, which is going to be awesome. But she said, we were told all our lives as CISOs that the language of business is risk.
Hmm.
She said, but that's horse crap. She said, the language of business is profit. It's raw, unadulterated profit, period. It is all about profit. And we often lose sight of that. And so when we come in and talk about cybersecurity, we try to talk about risk. Well, risk is the translator of profit when it comes to cybersecurity. But we're not talking about the technical bits. We're talking about decisions and acceptance of that risk and its impact and its likelihood. And so you start getting into that as the language that's missing. MSPs that start talking like that, zero problem selling cybersecurity. They do it perfectly. It's fine, right?
Yeah.
It's the ones that don't do it that way that try to talk about the nerdy bits, which I love dearly. I love me some nerdy bits, right? That doesn't work. Me talking about XDR and SOAR doesn't change it, but me talking about when something happens, I can limit the blast radius of it. I can make it so that hopefully 2 people get impacted or one system gets impacted, but we've made the right design decisions. We've made the right things about how we give people access so that we can keep business functioning when this guy gets killed. It's the way we manage a battlefield. And back to your point of saying what's negative first, it's really not. It's business. And the other side she went on to say is that when we talk
negative
about
dollars,
I
dollars,
see what
not
you
a
mean.
negative
I see what you
connotation.
mean.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so the other thing she goes on to say is that, when you think about it in business, you take on all the risk you're going to take on the minute you open shop, at least for the most part, other product line expansion notwithstanding. But when you decide I'm going to go into business, you took a risk and you hope to make a profit for it. So CEOs are in a just exposition to us and business owners are in a just exposition to us where the risk they are taking is to make that profit. And you're now trying to sell them even on this understanding that risk, right, is something in this technical world. They go, cool, I'll take that risk because I don't understand it and it doesn't seem that bad. I'll take that risk. We're good. What's happened is insurance providers have now forced and said, oh, you're not insurable anymore. You imagine walking into a doctor and somebody going, Luis, sorry, bro. We know you're going to die. We can't insure you anymore. Sorry. We need to cancel your insurance application you just put in. What does that do to you about getting motivated to get in health, right? Like, oh, shoot, I need to lose weight. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. This is great. It seems that same panic when those insurance providers are being declined and saying you can't unless you do that. It moves everybody instantly in those 2 years, right? So I do think that we're seeing it move the needle forward of maturity. And maybe I cycled back to your first question. I'm not sure. But anyways, I do think we're seeing that a lot of the market forces and pressures are driving that change in our world where everyone is having to get more sophisticated, but it's also becoming more endemic in it. I mean, at the same time I talk about this in the last year or so, we've seen the National Cybersecurity Strategy, NATI strategy from March of 2023 here. We saw this come out talking about main things, but the one that I like to point out is they came out with a mantra of secure by design, secure by default, right? And it's this understanding that comes really from 3.3, which is there in the strategy that says we need to shift the responsibility and liability to the people, right, that are most able to do change. And that goes on to say that often the most vulnerable population are the ones that consume these products from us, from your software, from our services as MSPs, right? Those people that consume that, right, are the ones that are the victims of it. And the ease is to actually make you and I more responsible as MSPs, right? And you see that shifting that responsibility up to the MSP to say, hey, if the MSP is going to take these clients and they're not going to do what we need to do, then we are actually in some ways in responsibility in that together. And we have the responsibility to say, no, I'm going to set a standard. This is the way I'm going to
Mm.
serve you. And so you're just seeing a lot of forces change, but the secure by default and secure by design aspects of that are now making it easier, where saying to Microsoft, why would you have this disabled by default? Why is it not just on by default in the tenant? If I buy a brand new car, is there any chance the airbag isn't turned on by default, or that ABS brakes are turned off and I have to go turn them on somewhere?
I
Zero
know.
chance.
I know. It's silly when you put the comparison like that, but it makes so much sense. And I think the challenge is just where we have come from, because like it's not like when ABS was introduced, people had the option of turn it on
Sure.
or not. But we also didn't have ABS before,
Yeah.
and so I think in many respects, like when I remember when security defaults kind of came along. If you didn't have it before, it was disabled,
Right.
because it would actually cause stuff to break if it
Sure.
was just
If you didn't have MFA
turned on automatically.
registered or other
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
things,
yeah.
yeah, 100%.
And so I understand some of those things, and now, I mean, obviously, with any new tenant that you create, MSP or security defaults is turned on,
Yep,
and so they're obviously making changes for
for
that
sure.
type of thing to work a lot better. But man, like the moving mountains of some of these changes, I can't even begin to imagine some of the widespread differences in configurations and the
Yeah.
things that are happening out there. I mean, Microsoft could break a lot of stuff for a lot of people when they make
Well,
sweeping changes
and
like
it
that.
goes so deep, right? More than that. But I actually love looking at this timeline, and it's one of the talks I've been giving now. It's stuck for a while, and I usually get tired of my talks and make a new talk every couple of presentations I give, right? And it's really, I show a timeline, Luis, where I go, and you were there. In fact, you were there for this version of this, right? We talked about it. I don't know if you saw my presentation, but in Can ITCon, I said, hey, here's some dates: 1897, 1950, 1965, 1966. What are those dates, Luis? You got 1897, right? 1950,
Oh
1965, and
shoot.
66.
I don't know. The
The
seatbelt in
car was
cars.
invented, yep, in 1897, and we didn't have a patent for a seatbelt till 1950. In fact, we changed the entire landscape of cities, right? We moved from living in a tight city where I was going to walk one city block to where I worked, and I was going to walk 5 city blocks to where I died and went to church, right? And that was the world. And to having cars, suburbs, the ability to make streets that had to be wide enough for cars, like the whole world changed from 1897 to 1950 under the advent of the car. Yet we didn't even think about securing it. In fact, one lady had to go in California and paint lines down the middle of the road because people kept getting killed by hitting cars together, or hurt or injured or damaging their cars. And so she painted lines against California's wishes. In fact, they were going to prosecute her until they go, wait a minute. It seems like people aren't hitting each other anymore. This is amazing. Let's do this across the whole National Highway Traffic Safety Association, essentially. But at the same day, we didn't even have any type of laws on the books for this until 1965, when Ralph Nader writes a book and is an activist saying, hey, we need to be able to actually deal with car safety. We can't just make spikes on the dashboard so when I get in a wreck, I go through the spike, right? Like we can't do those things. That's not okay. And so, then you finally have legislation in 1966 with the National Highway Safety Vehicle Association, or laws that come out, right? And even then, it's not safe immediately. We have to go through a period of time where it gets safer and better and all of those
Yeah.
things. And so we're in that phase. That was 80 years. And then I do a comparison. I did one on hockey too. And I said that we often get our stuff out of order when we do have our premises correct. And so, for example, the jock strap was invented in 1897 and the helmet wasn't invented until 29. And even then it didn't get to made into NHL.
Priorities.
Right. It's like protect the boys, not the brains. And then even then when they did invent it, nobody wore it because it wasn't manly. They'd wear the jock strap, but not the helmet. That wasn't manly. The missing teeth made it manly in real hockey. In fact,
Yeah.
it stuck so hard that it was 1979 before a rule was made that you had to wear a helmet. And the last player, McTavish, rolled off the ice in 97 not wearing a helmet his whole career. And so you get down this path of one more comparison being the internet was in digital PC 1937, the internet 81. By 86, we'd already had the AIDS Trojan in the first, ransomware efforts, right? And then we still hadn't talked about national cybersecurity strategy or having laws and things around this until what are we 2023 or 2018, the first one in the US. Same thing in
Well,
Canada,
this
very
is what I
similar.
mean. Is that these are the shifting changes that
Yep.
have not really started until so
Very
recently.
nascently. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and so I think it's just going to be a generational thing. It's going to take time before
Agreed.
the new generation of business owners, all they hear about is
And it's
cybersecurity.
built
You know,
in. I don't think
yeah,
about
yeah,
security when I get in my car. I don't think about ABS. My kids don't even know what the hell ABS is unless some
yes,
great dad
yes.
taught them, and I didn't. I guess I'm an idiot. But the point is, I think we're going to get to a point where there's a whole combination of these fixes coming together, and we're just watching the beginnings of them. And we
Yeah.
get to be in this interesting center stage, you and I. It's very fun.
Well, and also for the vendors, I think, because a lot of the vendors are obviously leveraging the big platforms, the AWSs, the cloud, the
Which
Azures,
helps a
the
lot
so
of
on and
that
so on.
normalization.
100%. And I mean, you've heard the stories of like the cloud files in AWS, the default setting being that these files were public and
Right.
some,
That's
database with health
insecure by
records
default,
got out.
isn't it? Yeah.
But my point is that these are the pressures that are mounting
Yep.
for the supply chain as well, that I think are making some shifts and changes in the industry
100%.
also.
100%.
But it's just a matter of time. Like again, sweeping changes are really difficult to do across the board because sometimes you don't know the impact of some of the changes. But
That's true.
it's good to be seeing those happening. Now, the theme of this thing is kind of open ended because, I just want to sort of bring people that have something to say or offer. And I had asked you in the email that I sent you. It's like, can you think of anything that feels illegal to know? Kind of confidential status. That maybe is the thing that you share with people regularly and is always kind of a mic drop moment, or like you get the big open eye head nod.
I'm going to be honest with you. I took this on pretty quick, and I hadn't thought through that. I guess for me it would be, and I got in trouble for this a little bit. I got definitely shunned by Mackenzie Brown, as a matter of fact, with Black Point Cyber. We were on stage together doing an incident response panel, and we were all talking about that. And I had a very real moment and started really breaking down all the things I've been involved with our own incident, the one that we took, that we had our massive impact from. Right. And so I was breaking that down. And one of the things that I divulged was that I was a confidential informant to the FBI for about 3 years or so for cyber reasons. And so what I did was I didn't want to share data on my clients and information about TTPs, right? Telemetry, right? Information that we gathered from our tools about attacks against our clients. I didn't want to share that without their knowledge, but I also wanted to share that without their knowledge. And I didn't want to ask and have to deal with that. I wanted to actually just help share telemetry that was only going to be used for telemetry, denatured. It wouldn't have the client's information, things like that. It would be brought down to just what those
Yeah,
TTPs I could pull out were.
anonymous.
And so what I also didn't want to do is wind up being an MSP that had to sit on stand and say, hey, here's what I've been doing. And this happened before it was Iconic. This actually was at Choose Networks. I didn't want to also then be like that guy where I had to say I've been doing this with my clients because I've now called into court. And so what we did was I reached out to the local Fed office and I said, hey, listen, I want to have an open relationship to be able to share information with you during a compromise and then ultimately have a path if we ever have a massive compromise. And I won't say I made this up myself. I got this from an incident response planning we spent $35,000 for, and we brought in a team to help sit down with us, Tony Miller and myself and a bunch of others, to do an incident response plan for the new entity at this point. And so this was kind of like a combination of it. I'd already had this need to reach out to somebody, but I also said I needed better relationships. It was right in that nuanced period of beginning of this, and I guess this would have been 2000. Yeah, I won't say what date because I won't date it too much because it might divulge too much.
20 years ago.
Let's say 20 years ago. Anyways, so I said, listen, I would like to share it, and can you keep that confidential? Can we make it a way that where I don't have to like necessarily do it, and it just gives you data, da da da. And the guy said yes, but I'm going to have to make you a confidential informant where you can inform. We're going to go through the same process of any street criminal or anyone that's going to be a confidential informant. Are you the Matt Lee out of this city? I said, yes, I am. Why? And
Wichita.
Wherever it was, at this point. In fact, it was actually another city where I was born. And so, and I said, yeah. And I'd had my Series 7, my 66 LHVA, so I was registered quite a few times with the feds. But the point was, They then gave me a jacket number ultimately, and then read me rules. I actually had to meet with two officers at all times to make sure that what I was saying was the truth between the two of them. And I then got read these rules every time, and what I couldn't do. One of those being talk about this thing supposedly. You're right, and
Mm.
I obviously wouldn't talk about what I've divulged or any of that stuff. But the point is that it was a very interesting experience, but it gave me a very direct connection to say, hey, I'm seeing this. And I actually got a couple of them that were validated, right? And the feds aren't very good at giving back and forth and giving back data to you if you've ever shared with them, like through IC3 or other things. There's just not a lot of collaboration after the fact for sure. And so I sent in some IP addresses that I was finding from China and some compromised accounts that were very targeted at MSPs, and the data came back to be valid, and it was very cool, and it got me a lot of ability to then share and ask for information through that organization. But
Yeah.
I then
But
resigned it ultimately when I left that position.
but I think the
Yeah.
learning there, or the silver lining perhaps, is I think sort of having that network, or asking those questions, or setting up those relationships in advance of an incident or a situation could be super powerful. Because
Yep.
if you're just getting breached now, and you have to start that process right this minute, the time that you spend just getting in contact with an office that will listen to you
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
first place might be the difference between being able to recover and not being able to
It's
recover.
easier today than it
Or
was 3 years ago, but I agree with you. There's
for
still a
sure.
challenge. Just with
Well, and
IC3 and some of the other awareness around this in the feds, you see a lot more of this specialization. But yeah.
And the Canadian government has also started sort of a security
Yep.
baseline recommendation thing
And a
that they've
reporting
started to really
mechanism as well is
well.
starting to
And
become
a lot
fruition.
of businesses are required by law now
Yep.
to have reporting mechanisms. Especially on the privacy of data side, like that's been in place for a while,
Yeah. It's
but it's now
Pepita, right?
finally
Yeah.
linked. Yeah, yeah, Pepita, but it's now finally starting to get sort of connected to the
CSF. Yep.
cybersecurity aspect of things,
Yeah.
because people like schools or organizations that maybe are under regulation like Pepita are constantly reminded that they have to maintain this data or PII security, but a lot of other folks are not,
Yeah.
and so this is kind of where
That's
things
where
like
we are here.
GDPR,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, but this is where you see the influence of some of the European programs and GDPR
Agreed.
and things like that starting to sort of make their way
Well,
into the
and you
other
also see the
streams.
pressure of the Five Eyes community in general, right? The US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they're all taking similar tacks in similar timeframes. Um, One of the things that I didn't want to miss is where that understanding of needing to have that contact ahead of time came from. So Michael George at Navigate 2018 brought in the police chief from the Boston City Marathon bombing that was in charge of that operation to respond to that at that time. But they were also in charge of the response from a planning perspective. Every year, the day after the Boston City Marathon, he goes on to say that they actually start planning for the next one. They start planning what are our routes, how we're going to do our fog walks, right? If you're not familiar with that, it's looking for anything that might be bad, right, in the airplane context. But in this case, it's bombs, it's people, it's guns, it's things like that, right? The fog walk there of the route. They go through and do the support route. They understand what their response pieces are. But one of the things that he said that stuck the most was he said we would have never caught the criminals. I think one died, one was actually apprehended. We'd have never caught them if we hadn't have done the preparatory steps. He said, we actually signed agreements with the federal authorities and the National Guard and all the other players ahead of time that they had jurisdiction if we were to call upon this one thing, and that they had these things ready and this many resources, and they had these things planned out and this many street blockades capable and this many officers on duty to be able to respond to this. And our teams would know what these comms frequencies go to. And we had all that stuff comes from pre-planning. All that stuff comes from having the understanding of what the incident could be, how this might play out, tabletopping it, ad nauseum, until you get to a point where you can say, this is exactly what we're going to do. Block 7 and this street is going to have a car angled at 4 feet at this moment after a call of this. Right? Think of that
Mm,
complexity and what we're talking about there. And so, it just gets into this understanding of understanding at least enough that you need partnerships, that you need these relationships, you need plans made, you need to understand what you're going to be doing in an incident like that. It was really critical, and you're right. That's one of the main reasons I went after it, was from an incident response planning perspective, was have good contacts. I mean, now you have IC3 readily available. You can report. You have the ability to call a field office. They're very quick to get you to somebody in the United States, pretty much right on, especially if it's ACH related or something they might be able to do some ACH clawbacks on. But ultimately, I
yeah.
think, in my opinion, I just feel like there's a lot of things coming together, but being able to plan and be ahead of it and do those things and regularly review it is probably the most critical thing on how you survive security, because it's all about reducing the blast radius. It's not about winning. You're going to lose. 80% to your point of people are going to have a cyber attack. It's about reducing that blast radius of that, so its impact is less, and I can continue operations and I can move on and learn from it and close that hole. And this is about bringing in something healthy that from nothing, and that's a hard order, and it's going to take a lot of mini steps. So,
Now, it seems everybody obviously is talking about cybersecurity, and we're Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and so everybody's kind of overly posting about it. But I think there's always this interesting question of like where, again, just because there's a lot of noise, but where are some of your top sources of staying plugged into some of the major shifts in the cybersecurity community?
yeah,
What are some of your preferred sources for that kind of stuff?
I mean, I would call out. I don't want to miss anybody. That's not fair. I think there's just a. I'll speak at it differently, and you can be mad at me if you want to. I think the point is there's so much out there today. I think there's so many places. There's so many people. Most people are pretty quickly shot down if they're full of crap, and so you get into a point where, as long as you're discerning and you follow that and understand what people are saying and make sure you can understand them, definitely LinkedIn, social media, you're starting to see those be a massive source. Like even you and I, 2 years ago, when we jumped up on a Cafe Con Louise, right? And we started just talking into a stupid microphone. That's become the reality of today. You're seeing a shift of, when you want to go learn something, do you go and like call a professional first, or do you go look at YouTube and watch five idiots do it wrong until you go, that's the one? There we go. Got it. Let's move forward. With some discernment, you come up with the right one to follow, and then you
Hmm.
go do what you're going to do, or you have a better idea that you do want to hire someone, and you come in educated, and you're seeing that happen in marketplaces, right? People are now coming with a buying decision already made before they even talk to you. That's because they've watched enough YouTube. They've gotten that information. So maybe I'm not answering it correctly, but I would say to stay on top of this, you're watching a shift in our world to where educators, enablers, content creators, people that are driving this world forward are the thought leaders that are out there debating and having these conversations and learning their own right, but are also out there educating and raising the tide for everybody else. So who are some
Yeah.
of my
Well, let me ask the
favorites? Yeah, go
questions.
ahead.
Let me ask it slightly differently because
Okay.
it's actually one of the speed round questions, but I think it's apropos for this particular topic, which is who is inspiring to you in that security, discourse and community as far as who you listen to a lot?
Yeah. So I'd say John Hammond's probably the OG, just in general, that he started talking about a non normalized set of cybersecurity, which is the nerdy bits, right? And the stuff that I just love so very much.
Mm.
I think, though, when you start speaking towards it, Wes Spencer would be another one of those, right? He's so empathetically connected to what MSP struggles are and how cybersecurity needs to be delivered. And that's kind of a unique mix, right? Like the empathy combined
Yeah.
with that understanding there. I wouldn't, be remiss to say my boy Luis, at least for some things in that regard about asset
I
management,
just
things in
asked.
that
I
regard.
just asked the
Yeah, yeah,
questions.
yeah. I
I
know, I
just
know.
asked the questions.
I know I tease. And then I think you'd say, as I step into some non-standard ones, like James Azar, he's a CISO that does a morning daily briefing. He's a very interesting fellow. But what he really taught me out of this was, if you include your audience as you produce this, just like you have Brian saying spikes look so cool coming up here in the chat. Yep, we can see your chat over here. Say, Matt, you're an idiot. I'm fine with it. Right. And so when you see that, you engage people, you bring them in, you make them feel heard, you make them feel part of the part, and you're overcoming, that gap, and you're bringing your audience in. And so he really made me feel heard early on when I was going down this path years ago. And so it was like that. And genuinely, I have the same fondness to you for the same reason. So those people that are very engaging are very valuable. Tom Lawrence is awesome just in the way he breaks stuff down and videos and his dedication to his craft. He's just fantastic. And I know I'm saying a lot of the known ones, but outside of that, probably Night TV with Alyssa Knight. She's fantastic. Network Chuck just for a good time, probably as well. But there's just so much out there. I could keep going on, and I feel like it's unfair of me even to list the people I'm thinking of, because there's so many others that I consume on a regular basis that I find to be valuable, that I don't find to be misleading and dumbing down the audience. And so I think there's
Yeah.
a, God dang it, Luis, I told you I wasn't going to make a list of people because I'm going to fail. There's like hundreds of
No.
people I
But
should list. But
you're not excluding anybody on purpose. You're just these are the things that come to mind, and if you think of others, feel free to
yeah,
send them over. We'll put them in the show
no, you're
notes.
good.
But I think those are all great suggestions. There's a few that I hadn't even heard of. So thank you for mentioning,
Yeah.
because like I will go check them out. And sometimes you just drop some of these things into a Teams channel or secure or
And
Slack
Chris
channel. Just get
Roberts, I
the
guess that's the
RSS
one I
feeds.
can't miss. I have to
Right.
add that one in. I feel like the girl when they're playing the get off the stage music, right? And then you're still like, no,
Krebs on
and yes,
security.
Krebs, yes, another. So, all right, I'm done. I'm not adding any more. Damn
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Well, there's plenty there to go and consume for anybody who's
Evan
like taking
Franzen.
furiously taking notes. Okay, stop. All right, let's go to a different speed round question because I know
Yeah,
you got to go in a few
I
minutes
do.
here. But what are you reading a book currently? What book are you currently reading?
I actually am not. I've never been a big reader, Luis. I've been a reader of articles. I'm a reader of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
I like to consume a lot of video content, audio content. I just don't read a lot. But I actually know that I'm starting a hard 75 January 2nd, and so I'm going to have to read 10 pages of a book every day. And so I've got a whole host of like books that I've gotten from people like Ann Westerheim and others that I have that I want to go read and get through. But I am not.
Now, not to ask an obvious question, but do you prefer texting or talking?
Man, it's so funny you say that. Like, I would probably say if I can see your face and I'm video face to face, I would prefer to talk because I can read more context and I can understand more about
Mm,
you. I would probably say that I feel like I stay in a bubble and I don't want to talk to people. So often texting is a very protected way to have that conversation at your own convenience. And so I've become a little millennial in that regard, in that I
mm,
would actually prefer to text probably. But if I have something that needs data or needs to be conversed, I want video. I want to make sure I see your face,
yeah.
understand this or disagree, and move through that. Right. So,
Yeah, yeah. The,
yeah,
the sarcasm in the eyes cannot be written
yeah,
in the text. I
yeah.
get it. Um, well, let me ask you a couple more, and this one's interesting. Is there anything that stands out as "quote unquote" the best career advice that you've ever received? And it might be something that is maybe personal life thing, or could be as a security thing. But I'm curious if there's this one thing that really sticks out.
Two quick things. One would be yourself. Don't fake who you are, right? Don't ever do that. Don't pretend to be somebody else. I went to lunch with a bunch of guys after I left the bank, and they were all high level executives, lots of money, big opportunities, my buddies' friends, and I acted like them. I tried to be like them. After the lunch, my friend came to me and said, "Matt, you're not welcome at the lunch anymore. This is I don't even know who you are, bro. I like you for you, and you're trying to be fake, and somebody you're not." And I learned that lesson very hard, right? And so that was a really serious one. I think the other one is like don't let perfect be the enemy of good. I think oftentimes people let their perfectionism that drives them to success be the very thing that crushes them from being able to get good enough
Mm,
and go through things in an iterative fashion, understanding your humility, which means that if you distill that down, it means fail fast with a little bit of humility and learn from it each time and grow, which means you can't be afraid to fail. And I think it's that people that often chase perfection are too afraid to fail. If you put that
mm.
in the, I can't remember who this came from, but I don't want to misattribute, so I just won't guess. But it's basically saying that oh, it's Colin Powell. Sorry, there's the 30-70 rule or the 40-70 rule. It basically says if you don't know 40% of the information, you can't make an educated decision. You're guessing. But if you know
There's
seventy
a
percent,
tangential.
yeah.
Sorry, finish
But
up.
if you make to 70%, you often know too much that you're paralyzed to make a decision. And it's to know 40 to 70% is the real rule, right? Like is the point of this. So, anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
There's a tangential one that I like, which is kind of this idea of bias for action. But the quote is have impatience with action, but patience with results. And I think I see this a lot in conversations around sales and marketing. I see this in conversations about cybersecurity and trying to get clients on board with the big shift.
Yeah.
I see this also in conversations around trying to drive process or operational change inside of your MSP when things don't seem to manifest a change right away. And you
Right.
realize, well,
Yeah.
we just have to keep at it
Yeah.
and just create the habit and continue doing it. So, impatience with action,
Agreed.
patience with results. I,
Yeah.
I love that one too. Matt, always love chatting with you,
Yeah,
man.
brother.
You always say it's straight, and I appreciate your candor and the ability to chat with you.
Always,
Anytime I
man.
get this chance, I'm going to take it.
Makes me
So
very
don't.
happy you called on me now twice for your shows, which means at least I didn't ruin the first show last time well enough that I could come back a second time. And that makes me very happy in my heart, Luis. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think no. It was just I didn't have any other options.
Oh,
I'm just kidding.
that's fair. No, that's a way to say it. So I appreciate
No,
you, brother.
that's not it at all. I'm just teasing, of course. But I'll let you go to your next thing. For everybody else joining us today, thanks very much
Yeah.
for coming. We're doing these every Friday at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. MSP Confidential, brought to you by ScalePad. And thanks for joining. And hope the conversation was interesting. If you have questions, send them along, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, buddy.